are making our way through Julia Cameron's The Artist Way. If you're new here, hi, I'm Alexis. I'm a full-time artist in Brooklyn, New York. And in this series, we're going through Julia Cameron's The Artist Way week by week, and I'm just sharing my honest thoughts and reflections as a way to share with you kind of what I take away from it, but also very much accountability for myself to finish this program after many false starts and stops. And week 8 is titled Recovering a Sense of Strength, and Julia opens this with a section entitled Survival. When I saw this title, I definitely side-eyed a smidge because y'all, I'm tired of surviving. But I also, through the experience of working through this text, know that it's in those sections where I have that nervous system activation, if you will, that really good things come out of. So I was able to hold on to that truth and jump right in. Julia Cameron opens a section on survival, addressing the very truth that as a creative, we will experience loss of money and hope and reputation, but that there will also be gains. And it's in those moments of loss that we must learn to navigate through that discomfort. Not everything that we create will be met with applause, and not everything that we begin will see its completion. And if we can learn to alchemize those moments versus allowing them to become blocks in our creative journey, we can use that to inform how we move forward. And she also talks about the power that a mentor has on a creative, the power to uplift and encourage, and the power to crush. She talks about how often when we are met with criticism, and if it's constructive criticism, and it comes from a place of helpfulness, right? Even if it initially stings, and if we're open to it, we can see the benefit of that perspective, and we can see how we might be able to incorporate that feedback into our work to improve our practice. But if that criticism comes from a place of ill intention, it has the power to significantly impact our confidence in what it is that we're creating and become a sort of guidepost for how we move forward. And she really encourages us to learn how to distinguish between the two. And shifting from this conversation around mentorship and the power that a mentor has over a creative, she then takes up a conversation around academia entitled The Ivory Power. And in this, she addresses how academia often proves quite harmful to the creative. She talks about how teachers of the arts are often overly critical of their students' works, unable to embrace the full creativity of their students, and instead holding on to expected standards. And I've heard this so often from the people in my life who have gone to art school. And in this way, for me, I'm really grateful that I'm a self-taught artist. See, I studied literature at university, and I have my master's in elementary education, and I loved every minute of my education. I had the most tremendous professors, and within that environment, I really felt like my creativity was encouraged and it flourished. And so I can't imagine having gone a route where I was really exploring my creative expression through a more traditional art form and have been met with great resistance. I'm not confident that that route would have instilled a courage within me to pursue the path that I'm currently on. And what's interesting is that I didn't experience a squashing of my creativity, if you will, within education, but as I entered into workplaces in the field of education, that is when I experienced the greatest pushback against creativity. And I saw the significant impact that it had on teachers and students alike. As someone who taught all subjects for full classrooms for nearly 2 decades, I have a very deep understanding of just how creative and how flexible educators truly are when they are allowed to flourish and to stretch those muscles. And it really is those muscles that enable us to engage with and to support each and every single one of our students to the best of our abilities. So even while I was in the profession of education and I did not have the courage to really step into my artist identity, I was very much in my shadow artist during that time, I was acutely aware of how much creativity it required of me to navigate through our space and our days together in order to best champion and support my kids. And it was in those environments that I received the most pushback from administration to meet just arbitrary benchmarks to the detriment of our children. If I had a nickel for every conversation I'd had with trusted colleagues and administrators about true student thought leadership and creativity versus conformity and compliance, well, I'd have a lot of nickels. And truly, this is one of the greatest challenges that I faced as an academic. And I think Julia really took it when she said that most academics know how to take something apart, but they don't know how to put it back together. And I think I addressed this idea last week in week 7 in that conversation around growth mindset. I shared that within my experience in education, and I think that this very much applies to the experience of many creatives and artists out there, there's a tendency to take things apart and to criticize and to only acknowledge what could have been done better. And it's in this taking apart and examining the process and the growth that we often get lost in the details, and we fail to see the true fullness of the creation itself and the value that it holds. In week 7, I discussed my experience with perfection in academia. The idea that nothing is ever good enough and that there's always room for improvement. And I don't necessarily think that it is a terrible practice to look for ways in which we can improve and can become better and perhaps reach our fullest potential. However, if that is the only thing that we focus on, we often take it apart into such minute details that we lose sight of the larger picture, and we fail to see the good that exists within that creation and within its existence, and what a loss that is. And I often wonder how oftentimes that intense scrutiny and that taking apart and that criticism turns off what would be our most brilliant minds. And so as we experience that pushback to creativity, I think no matter the setting, whether it's a classroom in an academic setting or in an art studio, I hope that we can keep our focus on how much value there is in the qualitative and not just the quantitative. How much value exists in things that exist outside of those standards and things that push just a little extra, because in the absence of that pushback, what we're truly doing is training ourselves out of creativity. I often think about how much good exists in the intuition, in the qualitative data, and the hearts and minds of those around us. How much good exists in the imperfection and in the creativity necessary in the trying, and the good that exists outside of the box. Julia says that for an artist to become overly cerebral is to become crippled. And I think that's because it takes us out of that flow and out of that river that she addressed last week. And it takes us out of that receiving end of putting something down, and it puts us in that energy of trying to think something up. It eliminates that universe element of the great creator working through you in your creation. And I think it's time that we perhaps push back on those institutions that squash our humanity out of our creation. And Julia says that inevitably we will encounter people who navigate through the world in this way. And as we receive their critique and perhaps dismissal, it is our job and perhaps our responsibility to ourselves to not internalize that, to learn how to navigate through that discomfort so that it does not become a block that prevents us from connecting with the great creator and in creating something truly wonderful. And the next section is titled Gain Disguised as Loss. And in this section, Julia really talks about how oftentimes what we lose ends up being that which brings about something even better. And honestly, when I started reading this section, I laughed really hard because I just was at the Botanical Gardens for my artist date this week with a dear friend, and I was raised by a country music loving grandmother, and I was telling them how I keep thinking about that 90s country song that was something along the lines of like some of God's greatest gifts or unanswered prayers, and how in the moment when I really, really wanted what I thought was going to be for my greatest good and it didn't come to pass, it was absolutely soul crushing. But now, having been removed from those situations for a period of time, I can absolutely see how what I wanted in those moments was much smaller than what I'm capable of, and perhaps much smaller than the life that I want for myself. And so it truly was a tremendous blessing, for lack of a better word, I guess, that it didn't happen the way that I had hoped that it would, and that I find myself on the path that I currently am on. And man, that loss and the grief that I experienced in those moments was tremendous. But I consistently hold on to that idea of what is meant for you will not miss you, right? And I do think that there is something to being ready for what is meant for you, right? So if there is something that I am supposed to be doing with my life, but I am not quite ready for it, it won't come to pass. And so that means I have to do, this is really woo-woo, I hope you don't mind, but Julie is also a little woo-woo, so I think it fits okay. But there's this idea of like, if you are not healed enough, right? And I know that I was like, that burnout created such a low threshold for overwhelm that I kept being like, all right, I'm ready for the next thing, and I'm ready for more stability, and the next, I'm ready for my business to take off. And now when I think back to when I was like so desperately asking the universe for those things, if it had happened when I had wanted it to, my overwhelm would have been so crippling that I would have fumbled the opportunities so tremendously that it is now that I'm like, okay, I am doing the work of putting things in place so that when the opportunities come in, I have solid footing and I'm ready for it. And so it felt like tremendous loss, and it felt like kind of being on the sidelines, if I'm being quite frank with you. But I can see now how in kind of being taken out of the game, I have then been enabled to grow so much stronger and so much more steadfast. And I have been able to put so much more in place so that whatever comes next can truly be all that I hope that it can be. And she talks about how, like, the idea of if one door closes, another one opens, or if a door closes, a window opens. But the framing that I really appreciated of hers in this section is like, we have to navigate through the world and through those losses as if a silver lining is inevitable. And if we can acknowledge that when something doesn't come to pass, there really is something else better for us, and that the universe is simply pointing us in a different direction, that will help us from becoming perhaps paralyzed in that loss and succumbing to tremendous self-doubt, which would then prevent us from actually accomplishing what is possible. She encourages us to ask how versus why me. And I really love this. I think that it is so common when things don't pan out or when there's a hardship to kind of become self-pitying. Listen, I can say that because I've had periods in my life where I've definitely felt that way. But what has been really, really helpful for me over the last 3 years as I have been like rebuilding my life after that tremendous burnout is how. And so when something doesn't come to pass, it really is okay, so that wasn't the way in. What could possibly be the next way in? And in accomplishing what it is that you want to accomplish, the tremendous amount of flexibility you have to have and the creativity you have to have, right? So not necessarily taking no as your answer, but finding a different avenue to get to where you want to go. And I find this really interesting because in earlier chapters, she has definitely driven home the point of releasing the how and knowing your what, right? So I don't need to know how I'm going to get to where I want to go. I just need to know what it is that I want so that I know to put where I'm putting my action towards. And I've thought about this so much over the past few months. And I think that this kind of connects to it in a way where if it doesn't happen, I think what it is it's not getting stuck on one how, right? Oftentimes we have in our mind that there is one way that something will come to pass, or there's one avenue into our creative journey or this like great future we have envisioned for ourselves, when often it comes in the unexpected. And that's what she says in those earlier chapters. And so I think that this is a challenge perhaps to maybe grow or expand your understanding of the how, and to be willing to try just about anything to get to where it is that you want to go. She says that one of the most important things that we have to learn is to ask what's next and not allow ourselves to become blocked by those closed paths, and that no matter what it is that we do, we have to learn how to put one foot in front of the other. She then goes on to a conversation about age and time and product versus process. And I really enjoyed this section. She talks about how oftentimes in life we think that we are too young to do something, and then in the very next breath we're too old to do something, and how oftentimes we convince ourselves, specifically around creativity, that we have to have like this perfect time in life in order to pursue it. If we didn't do it when we were young, then we have to wait until it's a responsible time to do it as an adult. And oftentimes it would be until we're much, much older, maybe perhaps retirement age, or we just convince ourselves altogether that we're just too old. This is a conversation that I had with a very dear one just the other day about how, feeling as 41, how easy it would be to be like, I am too old to be trying to build something. But then if you really think about it, from 21 to 41, so much life has happened and so many things have changed. So what's possible between 41 and 61? And we're not getting younger. So I don't know, I'm never gonna be as young as I am today. So it's better now than never. And I keep thinking about, I know I mentioned this in maybe week 1 or week 2, but how my husband Mario will consistently tell me that the first best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And so I just keep thinking about how I'm so grateful for the ability at this point in my life to be able to do this, and how I need to let go of the expectations of others. And for me, it really stemmed in this fear of like, oh, I'm too old because I am fearful of how others will perceive me, and maybe I'll be embarrassed, and if it doesn't work out, then what will they think? And honestly, that's none of my business. It's none of my business what they think about me. The only business I have is what I am doing and what I am pursuing and how I am going about living my life. Because at the end of it, I want to be able to look back and know that I did everything that I wanted to do, and I tried a little bit of everything, and I want to have as few regrets as possible. And as it relates to age and time, and how we often do tie our creativity up to like our age and whether or not it's appropriate for us to be pursuing our creativity, Julia says that creativity occurs in the moment, and the moment is timeless. And I really, really love that. And she also talked about how often we will think that something might take too long to be good at. And I think she talked about this in one of the earlier weeks, and just how we want to be good right away. And last week we compare our beginning phases to the masterpieces of the masters, right? And we will convince ourselves that like, oh man, a year is so long and it will take me forever to get quote unquote good at this new practice, and I just don't have the time for it, or I don't have the patience for it. And by not starting, that time frame doesn't shrink. But by starting and putting one foot in front of the other, and by beginning your process, you're one step closer to being quote unquote good. I really love this, and I do think that I have mentioned this several times in this series now about how I really just love trying new things, and I love learning new things, and I have a very deep understanding that in doing that, it takes time. And in doing that, it's very, very messy. It never looks how you want it to look when you first begin. But in my mind, I always say it takes 2 years. It takes 2 years to be like decent at something. And so anytime I go into a new practice, or, you know, a new way of living, if you will, I do very much kind of keep my ego in check, and I have to very much invite curiosity in, and really hold the enjoyment of the process at the forefront of the entire journey. Otherwise, it's really easy to get bogged down on how it looks or how it turned out. And this ties into her conversation around product versus process, and how oftentimes our creative journey is tied to our understanding of capitalism, and that if we're going to spend time and often money to try something new, it has to be good. It has to amount to something, and there needs to be a finished product at the end. Versus what creativity truly is, which is a process. And it's an enjoyment of figuring it out. And it's an enjoyment of understanding your place within that practice. And so it very much is this release of that capitalist ingraining within each of us. And so that we can fully embrace that creativity and find that flow where we receive those messages from the universe, and we can tap into our intuition and really find our own voice and our own way of doing things. And I really, really appreciated this, because I know when I was first starting my artist's journey, I got hung up on it. I allowed myself to get hung up on that finished product so frequently. And it did change how I go about my practice now. And I do wonder if I had just like really been able to, I mean, who is able to? Maybe somebody who's vastly stronger than I am. But if I had been able to fully block out all of the voices who are coming at me about how I should go about my practice, I wonder how differently it would look today. And so as I have been thinking about that through doing this work with Julia Cameron, it has opened up a whole new level of curiosity for me about my practice, and how I kind of want to bring in some of that whimsy again and that curiosity. And I just want to have a lot more fun with it. That's really what I enjoy the most about this journey as a creative. So I really, really appreciated her framing and her pushing back, and just highlighting once again how much capitalism we have to kind of untangle from ourselves as we step into this creative existence. And Julia Cameron wraps up week 8 with a section called Filling the Form. And my takeaway from this section was absolutely like a breaking down of the bigger picture into the smaller pieces. So oftentimes we can feel really daunted by all of the things that need to get done, and all of perhaps the things that we need to acquire or access before we can begin a creative process or journey, if you will. And so it really is doing things small and incrementally, because oftentimes in that state of overwhelm, that overwhelm becomes a block. And then we can start to make all of the excuses as to why it's not possible to pursue what it is that we want to pursue. She assures us that oftentimes creatives, or people who are stepping back into their creative identity, feel like everything needs to happen or change all at once, right? So if I'm going to pursue this creative existence, well, then everything has to change, and I'm just gonna throw out my old life and I'm gonna bring in a new life, and voila, it'll be like in progress, if you will. And she says, don't do it that way. She actually doesn't say don't do it that way, but she's very much like, yo, slow down, take it step by step. And for me, you know, if you've been here, I'm not gonna rehash the whole story for y'all, but my life did change almost overnight, and everything became vastly different. And I can attest that that led to immense paralysis. Now, I definitely think that paralysis was very much tied to the burnout that I was experiencing. However, it didn't help matters. And so if I could go back, and if I had had a chance to do things differently, I don't know, or perhaps a different way to frame that is, in that moment where I found myself in that state of overwhelm, I wish that I had had the understanding to tell myself, like, you don't have to do it all right now. Find the 1 or 2 things that you can do to help you get to where you need to be. But I found myself just like flailing, really not sure what to hold on to or what to grab. And I existed in that state of immense overwhelm for like 18 months. And you know, it's really funny to me doing these morning pages. I never realized how often I tell myself, slow and steady, one thing at a time. Like, there are at least once a day in my morning pages, I've said that. And there are many days where I've said one or both of those phrases multiple times, like as a reminder to myself. And honestly, it was through those morning pages and seeing that pattern and recognizing how that absolutely connected to this state of overwhelm and this state of just like, I have a lot to do in order to make this sustainable, and I have a lot to do in order to grow this into something that is like what I believe it could be. Those morning pages really highlighted the necessity for me to very systematically start mapping out my days. I usually would just have like all of these things that I had to do swimming in my brain and on a variety of post-it notes all over my desk. And I would kind of go through them all day and every day, and I just had this like constant like to-do list spinning, right? And that created such a significant mental load that I was carrying with me through every moment of every day. And that was adding to that sense of overwhelm, which was adding to that sense of paralysis. And it was just this like vicious cycle. And when I first started out on my own, I was like, oh, it's fine. I can figure it out. And like, it doesn't really matter as long as everything's getting done. As long as everything's getting done. Okay, one thing at a time. Slow and steady. And so through these morning pages and by setting up a system for myself and mapping out each week and just kind of having different like lists going on, I tell you, much like the morning pages allowed me to release my swimming thoughts before I got into my workday, and how much of a significant benefit I found in that practice by mapping out my week and having like these very incremental things that I can do to move my goals forward. It has freed up so much of my mental space to actually do the things. And I feel so empowered in that. And I don't find myself writing slow and steady, one thing at a time in my morning pages anymore, because I have that slow and steady, one thing at a time, those incremental small things that I can do mapped out. And I know that I can take these manageable steps each day to eventually reach that larger goal that I have. And so I really do appreciate her just assurance that like, yeah, slow and steady is the way to go. And if things feel big and overwhelming, instead of that becoming a block for you, find the one small accessible thing. But once again, the most important thing that you do is find a way to put one step in front of the other. And in our tasks this week, everything centered around the practice of envisioning, right? So envisioning your goals, or envisioning what has not yet or perhaps cannot come to pass. And I found this all really interesting. And I wonder very much if it connects back to this practice of you have to first envision what it is that you want so that you know what you're working towards. And in doing these practices, we can strengthen that muscle so that we can get even more clear about what it is that we want, and then those steps that we can take in order to get there. And this week I went to the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens with a dear friend, and it was a rainy day, but the rain parted and it was just really lovely to be in this beautiful space in the heart of Brooklyn, and it was really, really lovely. And anytime I am in nature and in community, I leave endlessly inspired. And I have kept up with my morning pages, and I will say that in order to kind of ease back into it, I did shorten them to 2 pages a morning for most of these past couple of mornings. And this morning I had a thought where I was like, I wonder if I am doing a disservice of only doing 2 pages, and I wonder if it's on that 3rd page once I get through the like menial, like, here are the things that are on my mind right now. Once I get through all of that and I get more into the free form stream of consciousness, that's where the breakthroughs come through. So today I did my 3rd page and it did help bring some clarity. So don't shorten those. I do think that there is something to the length of them, and there's something to getting through like what your brain needs to put down so that you can get to the point where it is like free balling and you can actually like get to the thoughts that are the most beneficial for you. But yeah, that's week 8. And it was a doozy. I had to split up this reading into multiple sections because it was just, okay, it was longer than the past few weeks and it was just a little bit heavier than the last few weeks. And I really appreciated so much and I took so much away from it. And honestly, I am really feeling extremely encouraged. And you know that I entered into this 100% skeptical and just like, whatever, take it or leave it, I guess, but committing to seeing if it was worth the hype. And I know we still have, 4 more weeks to go, but I have found myself recommending this book to so many people in my life, and I 100% see its benefit, and I think that it has challenged me to process so much of my experience and to get really clear on what it is that I want and where I want to go and what I can do to get there. And I feel like for the first time since I left teaching that I have my feet on the ground and the seeds that I am planting are significant. And I know I am going to get to where I want to get. It just might take some time because it always takes a little bit of time. But y'all, this was a long one. And if you stayed this whole time, I want to thank you for spending your time with me. I know how valuable time is, and I am truly honored. I really am. And if you found value here, if you gave this video a thumbs up, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps YouTube recognize that what I am putting out holds value, and it will share it with others who might also find something of value within these videos. And if you would like to follow along, typically I share my art and life in the city here. I would be truly honored if you subscribed. I just want to say that I appreciate every single one of you who are here and spend your time with me and share your thoughts with me. I am just so excited about our community that we're growing here, and I can't wait to see how it evolves in the days and weeks to come. But I'm gonna leave you on that note, and I'm gonna say lastly, whatever time of day you've watched this, I hope it has been a kind one. Until next time.